So you can make quite a few mistakes when playing Gotham Knights when it comes to combat efficiency, completing unique achievements, or just doing regular bad stuff. In some ways, the game can explain things quite well, while in others, it just lets you completely off in the dark to discover on your own. That's why today we're going to go over the biggest mistakes that I was also guilty of when I first started, in the hopes that you won't repeat them or at least help clear out any challenges you might be currently facing. Also, don't forget to drop a like on the video if you enjoy it, and let's dive right in. Coming up first, one of the big mistakes I realized way too late in the game is that I did not switch enough between the characters, especially during the Court of Owls story missions, specifically because many of these characters have momentum abilities that only unlock if you defeat a very large number of Court of Owl enemies, especially the Talons, and these are quite abundant during the Court of Owl story missions, not so much in the open world. So do yourself a favor and try to complete one of these missions with each of the characters so that you can unlock at least a few of these momentum abilities before you start hitting the ones in the open world. Just for some reason, the open world events containing any Court of Owls are pretty rare compared to the other gangs, so you'd be doing yourself a favor if you try to do all of this during the story mission instead of just focusing and wasting all of that with just one character. Moving on to number 2, you can avoid so much frustration and deal so much more damage if you play enemies' weaknesses right and exploit the appropriate elemental status effect in every single fight. If you especially notice great damage numbers over their heads when you deal damage against them, or even more so if your attacks feel like wet noodles, that's likely because you aren't taking into account their resistances. But the problem is that the game doesn't even make that clear to you. It kinda lets you all alone to figure it on your own. So here's a few ones I noticed that work very well against frost-based enemies like the Regulators, Mr. Freeze, or even somebody like Clayface. Fire damage is king, and even normal attacks against them with fire-type weapons turn an otherwise tanky enemy into something that can be dropped in just a couple of hits. This was especially the case with Clayface for me, where I brought shock damage thinking that was great, but in reality I wasn't doing almost any damage. Once I switched to an appropriate weapon that had this fire weakness on it, the damage numbers went sky high and his health bar dropped very fast. Similarly, in the case of the League Assassins, you can also use Fire or Toxic, especially with Robin, as the damage over time effect completely prevents them from doing their whole shadow disappearing act. Well, in this case, Toxic is something that they can be a bit more resistant to, which in the case of Robin, that's not really an issue, so for everybody else, just use Fire instead. You can pretty much see the effects on some of these enemies. The ones that have the damage over time on them will not despawn at all, while the other ones keep spamming their abilities in the background, which can be quite annoying. Frost can also work very well against them. Just keep in mind that they will still despawn or well go back into the shadows once the effects are over. For everybody else, just use the burst from the shock damage and also Frost in case you want to freeze them, since that works great for the others that don't really have any specified weaknesses. Moving on to number 3, you're going to want to plan your abilities and how you spend your points into them accordingly, because there is no respec at all in Gotham Knights, and unfortunately you're kind of stuck with your early on decisions. It does, however, let you reach level 40 in New Game Plus, which in turn would let you acquire a lot more perks, though likely not all of them. You're still going to miss 1 or 2 depending on your choices. So either plan them well from the start or just jump into New Game Plus. The story will restart, but all of your unlocked items, abilities, and collectibles will still remain. The level cap will also increase to 40, but luckily you can reach 35 to 36 in just like half an hour after starting it by simply redoing all of the training challenges. They give about 25 to 40,000 XP each, which means you can reach those levels really fast, and from that point on you can just do a few story missions and you will reach the new max level in no time. By the way, I also encourage you to complete all character specific cutscenes because they also give you 1 final point each, and also pay attention to the collectibles like the battle ranks and the landmarks. You can get 3 additional extra points from completing these, but just keep in mind that these can be a bit more tedious as there's a few dozens of them all around the map. Moving on to number 4, another big mistake I was guilty of was not crafting even my low level stuff and items. You should craft your low level items, especially if you find something particularly useful or powerful like a weapon or a suit with extra mod slots, because eventually the game will erase them. Once you out-level these recipes, the game automatically removes them, giving you a message that they've become obsolete. For example, this is me at level 30 with some awesome legendary gear. Well, by 35, all of that was gone, and you might sit there wondering why all of a sudden your character has 0 crafting specs left. Well, this is the reason why. So don't hold off any mats thinking that you're doing something with them in the end game. The game just drops you and showers you in all of these high-end mats eventually. So just go ahead, if you have anything noteworthy in your inventory to craft it, and at most dismantle it later in case you need the extra mats. But since we're on the subject of mod slots, always prioritize levels with multiple of them instead of the quality or even the level. You can oftentimes find an item that might be even like 10 levels below your current best, maybe even lower in quality, but because it has 2 or maybe even 3 mod slots, it can become way more powerful. Basically, every single mod can match the same amount of power on their own as the primary piece of gear, which is why I said it's absolutely worth it to always prioritize the number of mod slots compared to literally anything else. Moving on to number 6, another big mistake you might be doing is not prioritizing the following enemies, some of which can spam stuff like blocks, evades, dodges, attacks, and even summoning drones. Out of all of them, probably the drone masters have to be the most annoying. They constantly dodge, always cast multiple drones, and even leave mines behind. So unless you really want to frustrate yourself, do yourself a favor, do a quick scan for them in any of your next groups of enemies, and just take these downs as fast as possible like the vermins they are. Make sure you take them out of the game before they become a problem, and then you can just go ahead and clear out everybody else. Out of all of the enemies, they seem to be the hardest to defeat, especially at max level. Similarly, for the freaks, pay close attention to the ones with the rabbit mask on, because these will constantly revive their fallen mates in battle, and you will constantly wonder why infinite enemies keep coming at you. Well, it's because of them and their annoying spray paint or whatever. And even if they don't revive them, they buff them, so it's still worth it to go after them as soon as possible early on in the fight. Moving on to number 7, I would heavily encourage you to use the mid-out attack combos. Basically, every character has a mid-chain combo where using either 2 or 3 light attacks followed up by 1 heavy lets them perform a usually much faster and sometimes even AoE pattern of attacks. You can test these in the training room for your current main, like for example Batgirl has a 3-to-1 combo that works very well, with the final one unleashing 3 very fast attacks, either for additional damage or applying status effects. But the one that I love the most is probably for Robin's, because his combo is much faster, 2 light attacks followed by 1 heavy, with the final heavy being a fast spin with the bow that is just great at applying massive status effect. So if you couple this with his ability called Elemental Burst, you can basically almost always ensure that you're causing that explosion of elemental damage to apply both to the primary target but also to anybody nearby. It basically is the one thing that makes him so insane, and coupling this with the chain attacks is just awesome. And finally, at number 8, it's no secret that Batgirl has the best perks when it comes to disabling and even completely bypassing security systems, which is why you'll want to prioritize her instead of the others to complete Bruce's secret identity challenges. With her digital ghost unlocked, she's basically invisible to all cameras and sensors, which means you can freely move through them without having to disable them first. You only need to pay attention to the humans in these challenges and just avoid their sights, but basically everything else is just like walking in, planting those, and getting out of the building. This makes the whole chain very easy. At the end of it, you also get a pretty funny cutscene, an achievement, and you also get to unlock one of the really awesome suits in Gotham Knights. So totally make sure you bring her in all of these challenges. And this is pretty much it with my biggest mistakes. Let me know down below if you made any others. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time.